Xiusheng has two wishes. One is to wish that the emperor, who is at the top of 10,000 people, has his own place in his eyes and heart. I wish my child could be resurrected from death. But when she closed her eyes, the only thing swirling in her mind was, never to see you again. If she had known about the emperor's fickleness early on, perhaps she wouldn't have been so obsessed. It's just that, a dream of a ruler and a minister, empty name in ancient times. But the distant mountains are long, the clouds and mountains are chaotic, and the dawn mountains are green. Chapter 1. Awakening from Dreams. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You poisonous woman. I will never see you again, life and death. The Ulanara clan will never be abolished. The AI family has come to see you. You will always be the Empress of Jingren Palace. Ah! Xiu suddenly opened his eyes and sat up in a daze, unable to believe what he had just dreamed of. In her dream, she first conspired against a beautiful woman named Zhen Huan for her resemblance to Rose. Later, she was suspected by the emperor for colluding with officials from the previous court to pave the way for the third elder brother. In the end, she was framed by Zhen Huan and even exposed Rose's true death. As a result, she was imprisoned by the emperor and never seen again in the Jingren Palace. Empress. What's wrong with you, Empress? But where are you feeling unwell? I'm going to pass on the imperial physician now. Jian Qiu, who was guarding Xiu's lunch break outside, immediately got up when he heard the sound inside. As soon as he hurried in, he found the usually dignified and peaceful empress in tears and with a painful expression, stunned. He immediately turned around and went out to summon the imperial physician. Xiu finally came to his senses and looked around the familiar luxurious palace and the anxious Jian Qiu. It was then that he confirmed that everything just now was just a dream. Is it really just a dream? This dream is as real as one's past life. The suspicion of the emperor in the dream is so disappointing and chilling. The favor and framing of Zhen Huan in her dream have left her utterly devastated. What a detestable and cowardly self I am in my dream. Heavy like a painting, melodies like a scream. Counting back in time, Su Lao Yanling. A dream of a ruler and a minister, empty name in ancient times. Xiu murmured in his mouth. Even though Xiu claims not to be a good person, he still cannot face himself who has lost his original intention. Although she was born from an illegitimate family, her talent and moral character were also not bad. Otherwise, the late emperor would not have married her to the fourth elder brother at that time and the current emperor. But everything changed because of Rose's entry into the palace. Rose fell in love with Zhen at first sight, and even requested the late emperor to marry the sister of Xiang Fujin Xiu, who was already pregnant at the time, as the legitimate Fujin of the royal family. When Xiu's son Honghu's high fever persisted, it was also because Zhen was worried that Rose would be pregnant for the first time that he summoned all the imperial physicians. As a result, Honghu died of illness in his mother's arms at a young age. Why is it appropriate for Xiu to have her experienced aunt accompany her during pregnancy, but rather a legitimate sister who has not yet left the court but has an engagement with her? Why did Ro, who came to accompany childbirth, not stay by Xiu's side, but instead dance gracefully on Zhen's inevitable path in winter? All of this. In the past, Xiu was concerned about the glory and disgrace of the Ulanara family and refused to carefully consider it, but now, Xiu, who has just woken up from a big dream, cannot help but ponder deeply. Is Zhen really unaware of the conspiracy behind this love at first sight? Or is the value of legitimate offspring far higher than that of illegitimate offspring? Xiu tightly grasped the bright yellow silk quilt on his body, and it seemed that his eyes were hurt by the sleeping clothes embroidered with phoenix dark patterns. He took a few deep breaths before calling out to Jian Qiu. I have nothing to do in this palace. Just take a rest and it will be fine. Jian Qiu, go and report to the emperor, saying that the leader of this palace has violated the principle of not being able to face the Holy Spirit. It's better not to go to the Huafei Palace to settle down. Jianqiu instinctively responded with a yes, and only realized it when she was about to step out the door the second time. She turned around and couldn't help but say, "Empress, I am foolish. Why don't you let the emperor come and visit me instead of letting me go to the palace of Empress Hua? Tomorrow, I may not know how arrogant Empress Hua will be. Besides, you were planning to personally cook old duck soup for the emperor before. Otherwise, I will do it. When the emperor comes, we can have meals together." Yi Xiu looked at Jianqiu, who was still chattering about his plans, and the big stone in his heart just fell to the ground. Everything in his dream had not happened yet. She showed a soothing expression and slowed down her voice, saying to Jianqiu, "Tell the small kitchen to do it. Just tell the emperor as I told him, and let him not have to work hard to come. This palace has a headache and is unwilling to deal with the emperor. When the palace has rested, we will pass on the meal and enjoy the good things ourselves." Jianqiu didn't know for a moment why her own empress didn't insist on letting the emperor come to Jingren Palace, but she still prepared to step out of the palace gate for the third time without hesitation. Good autumn cutting, wait a little longer. Yi Xiu suddenly remembered the lucky son he had brought to concubine Hua's side. In his dream, the girl was only killed in the deep well because she was praised by the emperor a few more words. Why did the emperor praise a palace made for no reason, and why did he continue to speak even though he knew it was a chess piece he had sent to concubine Guiying Hua? I'm afraid it's just a means for the emperor to balance his concubines. Yi Xiu couldn't help but feel a little creepy. Hua Fei, and even Rose and Zhen Huan may just be chess pieces used by the emperor to balance the previous dynasty and the harem. Perhaps there is a hint of truth, but it has long been lost under power. At this point, Yi Xiu suddenly felt powerless, as if everything he had been pursuing for many years seemed extremely ridiculous. No love or favor can compare to that bright yellow body in the end. Find a reason to ask Fuzi to come back. Even at a young age, there's no need to get involved in these troubles anymore. Yes, I'll go handle it now. Heart-nourishing haul. Oh, isn't this Miss Jianqiu? But the Empress has something to tell her. The Emperor is currently busy. If it's urgent, I'll go report it first. Xiusheng, who was guarding outside, saw Jianqiu from a distance, so he came out with a smile and took a few steps. Jianqiu also smiled and bowed to her before replying, "It's not an urgent matter. It's just that the Empress has made a mistake again, but she doesn't want to disturb the Emperor's handling of court affairs or cause him worry. That's why I came to report it, so that the Emperor won't make a trip for nothing tonight." Upon hearing this, Xiusheng immediately changed his face and said, "It's a big deal that Empress Dowager's health is not good. Has there been a passing on to the imperial physician? When the emperor is finished with political affairs, I will definitely inform him." Jianqiu was well aware that it was inconvenient for her to stay here for a long time. She felt a little dissatisfied, but still smiled gently and said, "This is an old problem of the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager said that she only needs to rest more. Could you please pay more attention to the selection of the palace? Therefore, I would like to ask the Emperor to convey it on behalf of our Empress Dowager. Of course, it's an honor to be able to share the worries of the Empress, and I will achieve it." Xiusheng then put on his seemingly considerate smile. "Yes, then I'll go back to the palace first." Jianqiu patiently lowered her body slightly before leaving. Inside the hall, the Emperor frowned and stared at the back of Zhang Tingyu who had just left, with his words to Niangingyao swirling in his mind. Xiusheng, who was like a human spirit, served the emperor for decades. Seeing this, he knew that the emperor was not in a good mood at this time, so he raised his spirits and leaned over to say, "Your Majesty, has your tea cooled down? I will exchange a cup for you." "No need," the emperor wearily turned the emerald Buddha pearl in his hand. "Who was outside just now?" Xiusheng arched his body and pinched the emperor's shoulder, watching as the speed of the emperor turning the Buddha beads slowed down before speaking. Speaking to the emperor, it's Zhen Huan from the Empress's side. She said that the Empress has violated her rules and needs more rest. I'm afraid she won't be able to accompany the Emperor for dinner today. The Emperor's hand paused for a moment and seemed incredulous. Oh. Yes, Your Majesty. The Empress Dowager is also worried that she may be busy with government affairs and not think about food and drink. She advises you to go to Empress Hua's place for a meal. Firstly, the small kitchen in Empress Hua's palace is deeply sacred. Secondly, Empress Dowager claims that due to her poor physical condition, she has suffered a lot and hopes that the Emperor can help Empress Dowager. Due to Zhen Huan's respectful attitude towards him, Xiusheng didn't mind saying a few beautiful words for the Empress in front of the Emperor. Sure enough, after hearing this, the Emperor quickly threw the Buddha pearl to his left hand and stood up, shouting loudly. Then I'll go to Empress Hua's place for a meal. It's just that the Empress is virtuous and generous, but I can't ignore her. Xiusheng, you can go to my private treasury and pick some good ones to personally deliver to Jingren Palace, so that the Empress can rest assured and recuperate. I'll go see her another day. Xiusheng felt a lot of emotion in his heart, but he hid it tightly. He only looked up and shouted, set aside the Ikuan Palace. Chapter 2. Fuzi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After leaving the heart-nourishing hall, Zhen Huan went to the Ikuan Palace and told Consort Hua about Fuzi stealing things from the Jingren Palace and about taking him back for interrogation. After enduring the strange aura of Consort Hua, he finally got her approval and returned to the Jingren Palace with Fuzi Chuanshu Quanwei. Madam, everything has been done and Fuzi has brought it back. At that time, Xiusheng had already changed into a light blue flag dress and was preparing to eat, exuding a gentle and dignified temperament throughout. I, the servant, thank the Empress for her kindness. I am willing to be a cow and a horse to repay her great kindness. Although Fuzi only stayed in Ikuan Palace for a few days, he had already suffered and endured all the hardships. Now the Empress Dowager has shown great compassion and called her back to Jingren Palace. Fuzi only feels the blessings of heaven and the compassion of Empress Dowager Bodhisattva. Xiusheng felt a bit ashamed in his heart. After all, he had some bad intentions when he sent Fuzi to Ikuan Palace. Although I am currently thinking about the cycle of cause and effect, and Hua Fei is also a bitter person who was blinded by love and thought of saving Fuzi's life, it is not worth Fuzi's gratitude and tears. Zhen Huan poured a cup of tea for Xiusheng with an eye on his face, and while Xiusheng was drinking tea, he stood up and said, Empress, knowing the pain you have suffered elsewhere, saved you from the sea of suffering. In the future, you must remember it in your heart and not let down Empress's kindness. Xiusheng smiled admiringly at Zhen Huan and comforted Fuzi, saying, You are a person from our palace, so naturally our palace will not look at you being wronged. Please rest for a few days and then stay in the palace to serve. Fuzi is only 17 at this time, and he has not experienced any setbacks. After this battle, he has long been the leader of Xiusheng Ma Shizhan. She kowtowed her head and said, I, the servant Fuzi, am willing to go through fire and water for the Empress. I will not hesitate. Xiusheng asked Zhen Huan to help her up and looked at the two of them. His thoughts changed and he spoke again and again, Fuzi. If this palace doesn't call you to describe winter in the future, will it be okay? Fuzi's eyes, like those of two little deer, were immediately filled with tears. Then he solemnly kowtowed to Xiusheng and said, Thank you very much, Empress Dowager, for giving her a name. I promise to follow Empress Dowager to the death in the future. Okay, this palace has 4 seasons, including pruning autumn, painting spring, embroidering summer, and you. So, this huge Jingren Palace can be considered complete. Xiusheng smiled for the first time after opening his eyes. She picked up chopsticks and was about to have dinner, but her eyebrows furrowed and she said, These dishes are all my favorite dishes today, just. Xiu looked at one of the roasted eggplants and couldn't help but think of the emperor in his dream who left with a brush of his sleeve when he mentioned the old almanac of not favoring and understanding moderation. The piece of eggplant he had picked up for the emperor from the exquisite plate was smashed heavily like his face was swept away, leaving a mixed feeling in his heart. After raising his hand to signal Jianxiu to withdraw it, Xiu felt a little better. I don't like to eat eggplants in this palace. Don't make this dish in the future. Madam, the emperor has come to our palace for a meal today. The imperial carriage is already on its way. Zhou Ninghai shouted with his throat between his legs, not very agile, and rushed straight towards the feet of Empress Hua. Upon hearing this, Nian Shirlan immediately curled her lips and shook her handkerchief, affectionately nodding Zhou Ninghai's head. Her voice was filled with uncontrollable excitement, saying, "It's not the first time. What does it look like to be flustered? The emperor really loves our empress the most. He knows we will be in the draft soon, and he's afraid that empress won't be happy. This is a special trip to coax her." Song Ji looked like the small tail of Consort Hua, raised high and raised. After coaxing Consort Hua with a smile and eyebrows, she began to organize herself in an orderly manner. The small kitchen of Ikuan Palace is constantly heating up the dishes that the emperor likes, and there is a warm and fragrant jade in his arms, so the emperor also enjoys the time in the Huafei Palace, especially on weekdays. Sure enough, as soon as the emperor stepped into the Ikuan Palace, he heard Consort Hua personally instruct the palace maids to place his favorite dishes nearby, and a sincere smile appeared on his face. Empress Ai has worked so hard with her own hands. The emperor is here. Nian Shirlan let out a coquettish cry and bowed with satisfaction, saying, "The emperor is blessed with peace and prosperity. I always miss the emperor in my heart, so I can only pass the long time with this. The emperor is actually teasing me." The emperor pulled a pair of catkins from Nian Shirlan and dared not stare directly at those eyes full of friendship for a long time. "I truly love you and can't bear your hard work," the emperor patted his hands. "Let me have dinner with you, my beloved concubine." As the emperor drank 3 bowls of old duck soup in a row, Nian Shirlan gave a glance to Song Ji, who immediately agreed to exchange the soup for the emperor. "The emperor loves to drink this, my concubine, please add another bowl for the emperor." Nian Shirlan boasted of being meticulous and stood up to personally serve a bowl to the emperor. The emperor shook his head and thought that the empress was the most skilled at making old duck soup. He couldn't help but mention Xiu and said, "It's still Empress Ai who understands my intentions. If you were in the Empress Palace, you might have to repeat my rules of not exceeding 3 things." Speaking out, Yinjin felt it was inappropriate. Xiu, no matter what, is also the Empress of the Central Palace and the Lord of the Harem. Consort Hua has always been at odds with her, and these words will inevitably cause some trouble in the future. The emperor felt a bit embarrassed in his heart. When he took the soup bowl and drank it into his stomach, he was still wondering if Consort Hua had deliberately prepared old duck soup to squeeze the queen. However, Kun Yen Shirlan really didn't have these twists and turns. She only heard the emperor say that she understood the Sacred Heart better, and was not happy enough. So she was also happy to sell the empress face. "The emperor should not praise my concubine so much. It's just that the empress is ultimately the empress, bound by the rules of etiquette and law. If the emperor doesn't like it, he often goes to my concubine's palace. I don't care about the rules at all." Upon hearing the first half of the sentence, Yinjin was suddenly taken aback, thinking that the relationship between the empress and Consort Hua had improved significantly at some point. It wasn't until Nian Shirlan spoke the latter half of the sentence that the emperor's delicate heart finally fell into place, and then he brought up another topic. Niz is mischievous. This draft was also handled by Shirlan alone. It seems that Empress Dowager only spoke disrespectfully and acted very appropriately. I am very pleased. When it came to the draft, Nian Shirlan's high mood was only slightly depressed. She put down her chopsticks and lowered her head, saying, The emperor is about to have a beautiful woman, and I'm afraid he won't love his concubines as much as before. How could that be? The emperor was in a good mood today, patiently holding the hand of Nian Shirlan and walking outside. My Shirlan is the most beautiful and charming, how can others compare? Since you entered the royal palace when you were 17 years old, have I ever neglected you? The empress and consort dismissed a group of servants and walked hand in hand in the courtyard to digest their food. Nian Shirlan felt the warmth in her palm and couldn't help but be moved. If I really can conceive again, I would be worthy of the emperor's love. The strong fragrance of Huani was blown by the evening breeze onto the two of them walking in the yard. Unlike the more shy expression of Nian Shirlan, the speed at which the emperor moved the bracelet increased. Chapter 3. Draft. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The selection carriages drove in rows outside the Forbidden City, and countless young ladies from aristocratic families dressed in red-green fields walked slowly along the lines of Han military flags and full of military flags. They were all of the same age, but most of them carried all the hopes of their families and stepped into this cage-like besieged city. Coincidentally, concubine Hua drove by in a sedan chair. She stared at these young and beautiful ladies foolishly, and her heart couldn't help but feel sour. The newcomers are all about to enter the palace, and I don't know when we can have our own support in this palace. We need a prince. Empress. Song Ji saw that Nian Shirlan was in a low mood and was about to say a few words of comfort, but was interrupted by Consort Hua waving her hand. All right, let's go. As long as the emperor has his own palace in his heart, what if there are more new people? Nian Shirlan said loudly, as if this way he could follow in his heart and have more confidence. In the corner of the imperial garden, the ladies waited in groups of 3 or 5 for their father-in-law to recite their names and face the saint. Miss, please take a step to speak. Following the instructions given to the nanny, Dao Dong found Enlingrong, who had arrived late, in a remote place. Enlingrong had not yet recovered her breathing, her cheeks were flushed, and there were even some beads of sweat on her forehead. When she heard someone talking to her, she was startled and felt like she was about to fall backwards. Miss, don't be afraid. The servant is the one next to the Empress Dowager. She was ordered to hand over these things to the girl. Dondong quickly grabbed the petite Enlingrong and took the opportunity to say a lot like a bean, the Empress has heard that the girl has a hard journey, so she has taken extra care of her. Don't refuse, girl. Enlingrong took the cloth bag handed over by Duandong with both hands in a daze. Before his head could react, he had already thanked him with his mouth. The Empress Dowager's mother is devoted to the world, and there is no one to repay her. She only wishes for the Empress Dowager's phoenix health and longevity. Seeing that Enlingrong was about to give a big bow, Dan Dong immediately gave a weak hand and said, Madam has said that it will not be too late for the girl to personally thank you. Although Enlingrong was naive, she could also understand the profound meaning of describing winter. She suddenly lifted her head, but saw a kind smile on Dan Dong's face. She couldn't help but feel closer to the Empress she had never met before. Please convey on behalf of Ling Rong that if Ling Rong is fortunate enough to come into the palace to serve, she will surely bow and thank her for her kindness. After describing winter, Ling Rong finally regained consciousness. She rubbed the slippery cloth bag in her hand and took a deep breath before daring to carefully open it. A pair of simple yet gentle pearl earrings and a few silver bills wrapped around her head. Enlingrong's eyes gradually filled with tears, and her fingers trembled slightly to put on the earrings that were as light as hair, but as heavy as Mount Taishan in her heart. My own family is not wealthy, and I came all the way with my aunt, leaving very little silver in my hands. The clothes that I thought were the most precious are now even more out of place compared to a group of beautiful women. And the Empress's move was like sending charcoal in the snow, and she thoughtfully brought it over with an inconspicuous cloth bag. Even the most inconspicuous cloth in the eyes of the Empress, Enlingrong felt it strange to touch, indicating how luxurious the food and clothing in this forbidden city were. She sighed, not feeling at all that she had a chance to repay the queen. Madam, I have already taken care of all the servants. After staring at the imperial garden for a while, Xiusheng returned to Jingren Palace. At that time, Xiu leaned against the sandalwood square table and casually ate the newly offered oranges. Well, she didn't conflict with anyone else, did she? No. Dong Dong saw that Jian Xiu was busy fanning Xiu, so he consciously leaned over to start peeling another orange for Xiu. The words that the maidservant specifically said to Miss An in the corner were not noticed by anyone. In addition, the maidservant also secretly observed Miss Shen and Miss Shen, whom the Empress asked the maidservant to pay attention to. Miss Shen was indeed dignified and elegant, but Miss Shen... Oh. What's wrong with her? Xiu raised his eyes, thinking in his heart whether to persuade Consort Hua to move Zhen Huan to the broken jade pavilion this time. However, Miss Shen's words were somewhat inconsistent. She said she didn't want to enter the palace, but unfortunately, her attire was the most different. Her moon-white flag dress actually stood her out. The servant listened to that girl's voice, and perhaps her speech was also very good. With so much effort, why say she didn't want to enter the palace? Shut up, in front of the Empress, you dare to say these nonsense. Jian Xiuban stopped talking about winter with a stern expression and turned to carefully observe Xiu's expression. Xiu smiled calmly and said softly to Sherdong, "It's okay. Now that you're so clever, you're like you should be at your age. It shows that Aunt Jianxiu loves you. But in the future, don't make any fuss. Let others listen, and our palace won't be able to protect you." Describing Dong, he knelt down on the ground and raised the freshly peeled orange with both hands above his head. "I understand my mistake," he said, "but you're right." Xiu took the orange and handed it half to Jian Xiu, then continued, "Zhen's heart is divided. I have to teach her to correct this problem and let her live in Qingqian Palace." Jian Xiu was deeply moved by her own mother handing her an orange, but she didn't care why she was so confident that Zhen would definitely be selected. She nodded repeatedly and said yes. After just one meal, the draft matter had already been settled. Dongjing vividly told Xiu about the interesting things she had learned, and when the emperor chose Xia Dongchan, it caused laughter throughout the room. It's been a long time since the empress palace was so lively. Xiu was taken aback and quickly bowed, "Your Majesty is blessed with peace and prosperity. Even the servants below have made a fool of you." The emperor raised his hand and gestured for Xiu to flatten his body, then sat down on the bed on his own and said, "It's okay. I'm afraid I might disturb the queen's rest, so I didn't let him pass the message. The queen looks much better now." "Yeah, thanks to the help of Hua Fei's sister on weekdays." Xiu looked at the emperor's face calmly, making sure he hadn't heard anything. Then he breathed a sigh of relief and turned to signal to cut autumn tea. The emperor seems very happy to see that he has a beautiful woman. Taking advantage of the tea tasting, Xiu adjusted his expression and tried to care about the emperor as warmly as before. The empress is intelligent." Zhen generously gave a satisfied smile. Xiu felt a bit sarcastic. She suppressed her frustration and put on a wise and virtuous demeanor, saying, "The emperor is here to discuss the position of your sisters with my concubines, probably." "Exactly, take a look." The emperor threw the list of beautiful women to Xiu and leisurely drank tea. Xiu, who had been thrown something, was momentarily stunned, and then his heart became even colder. "I have never received the respect of the emperor before." For a moment, Xiu felt as if he had really let go of all these years of obsession. "I have loved, hated, and despaired before, but now I see each other in pairs, yet I am speechless." Chapter 4. Initial Confrontation. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Xiu took a deep breath and pretended to be gentle, saying, "The Fucha clan in the Manchu flag and the Borjigit clan in the Mongolian flag are both nobles, and the daughters of Shen Zishan and Jin Yuandao in the Han flag are also nobles, okay?" Shen Zishan. The emperor suddenly put down the teacup and fell silent. Shen Zishan's official position is higher than that of Zhen Yuandao, and his daughter's position is indeed not good or low. Zhen is in line with the emperor's wishes and naturally deserves to be a noble person. Isn't it possible for the emperor to bestow a title on Shen's younger sister? In addition, the Manchu-Mongolian alliance is an old custom, and Fu Cha's younger sister has a prominent family background, so obtaining a good title can also demonstrate the emperor's intentions. The emperor nodded and looked straight at Yi Xiu, but I originally wanted to give Zhen a title. Yi Xiu's expression was impeccable, gentle and magnanimous. I understand that the emperor likes Xinshe, but it's just not good to make the ministers fall for it. The emperor can wait for Zhen's sister to sleep and give rewards, so that the palaces won't have any complaints. That's good, the empress is virtuous, as you said. Yongjing took Yi Xiu's hand and patted her with approval. Cold Beauting was frightened by the emperor's intimate behavior, and Yi Xiu almost couldn't help but pull her hand back. After suppressing countless thoughts in her heart, she spoke gently again. Your Majesty, I have another heartless request. The warmth that was already limited in the emperor's eyes was replaced by a clear understanding that was indeed true. Yi Xiu looked at his hand that had been released without hesitation and calmly accepted his position in Yin Zhen's heart again, but without hesitation, he said. Shen Guiren has a calm temperament, and if she were to be bestowed with a title of Hui, I hope she can share the worries of the emperor and my concubine as soon as possible. Sister Fucha may be bestowed with a title of Xian. I believe that Sister Fucha is dignified and generous, and she is worthy of it. Okay. The emperor's eyelids were too lazy to lift and deal with it. The beauty who most wanted to be granted a title did not receive it, and he didn't care even more about the others. Yi Xiu does not care whether the emperor's interest is high or not, but only puts forward his own goals. Among the newly selected younger sisters, there is a beautiful lady named Lingrong. Despite her lower background, she still reminds me of myself when I first entered the royal palace. If the emperor also bestowed a title on her, how would that be? Unexpectedly, the emperor put down the teacup and said, well, I do have some impressions. Although I dress a bit plain, I happen to compliment those earrings and have a well-behaved and sensible personality. Yi Xiu smiled more sincerely and said, exactly, what does the emperor think of the word one? Let's settle for it. Yin Zhen waved his hand and lifted his leg before leaving Jingren Palace. Yi Xiu casually blessed his lower body and said, I respectfully bid farewell to the emperor. After the bright yellow figure completely disappeared, Yi Xiu stood up and leaned on the bed, calculating everything in his heart for the future. Auntie, Lingrong has really had an adventure this time. With the blessing of heaven, it must be the blessing of heaven. In a small mansion on the outskirts of the city, Lingrong and his companions tearfully held Aunt Zhao's hand and choked up, saying that the empress had taken care of her. At first, Aunt Zhao thought that Lingrong had not been deeply involved in the world and had been deceived. It was not until Lingrong took out the silver ticket given to her by the empress and bought this small mansion that she was deeply moved and pulled Lingrong straight towards the direction of the Forbidden City, bowing down. Thank you to Empress Dowager for her kindness. Empress Dowager has a long and prosperous life. After kowtowing repeatedly, Aunt Zhao stood up with red eyes. She patted off the dirt on Lingrong's clothes and looked at the two pitiful plain silver hairpins on Lingrong's head. Miss, I will become the mistress in the future. The empress has a kind heart and rewarded me with silver in advance, but now I have spent a lot of money on this house. Aunt Zhao sighed and said, the young master's family can't be of much help, but now there are some silver coins that she can't bear to give up. Aunt will go buy a maid and come back to the palace soon. Only with someone around her can she do it. Lingrong was already a bit timid, and when she was about to say something, she was interrupted, little master, you don't have to worry about anything else. The most important thing now is to wait for the grandmother who teaches etiquette to come, so that you can familiarize yourself with the rules in the palace in advance. Although I am supporting my wife at home, only on the day when I step forward can I save her from danger. Yes, Lingrong understands. And Lingrong wiped away her tears and tightly grasped the high-quality cloth handkerchief, secretly making up her mind. In a blink of an eye, it will take several days. All the ladies knew their positions and the date of entering the palace. Zhen Mansion. All I had hoped for was a pair of people for a lifetime. Now that I have entered the palace and become a noble person, it's really something I don't want. Zhen Huan sighed and complained to Lu Zhu and Huanbi. Liu Zhu's mind was pure, and as she looked at her own young lady feeling unhappy, she also felt sad. Miss, if only you had agreed to Lord Wen back then. Lord Wen and Miss have both read poetry and books, and he has always admired you, which can be considered a good marriage. But now he can only enter the palace. What do you know? No matter how good Lord Wen is, the young lady should like it herself. Huanbai took the conversation, but also kept her voice muffled. It's just that the young lady will enter the palace soon. What should the master and lady do? Father and mother have their own people to take care of, so you need to worry about anything. Zhen Huan had already known Huanbai's true identity, and couldn't help but hear a hint of undertone in her words. Her tone suddenly became a bit cold. Huanbai, do you want to stay at home? Mississippi. Anyway, wherever Miss goes, I'll go. Lu Zhu didn't notice any strange atmosphere between the two, so she spoke up on her own. Upon seeing this, Huanbai also leaned towards Zhen Huan and said, Me too. Please don't mind, Mississippi. That's the best way. You two accompanied me to teach Grandma. Now that I'm about to enter the palace, I naturally hope that you can all accompany me, so that the three of us can also be considered united. Zhen Huan let go of her worries for the time being, thinking that in the future, finding a royal guard or something for Huanbai would be a worthy gesture towards her father. Empress, it seems that Consort Hua may not come today. Why don't we leave earlier? Xiu sat upright at the top, feeling bored and unwilling to see Consort Hua. Just as he was about to nod, he heard Jiang Fuhai outside the palace shouting in a sharp voice, Consort Hua is here. It's earlier than that dream, but unfortunately I can't be lazy today, Xiu muttered silently, with a gentle and dignified smile on his face. The concubines below bowed respectfully, and in an instant, a large area of Wu Yangyang knelt down in the hall. Empress Hua, Jinan. Let's all get up. Nian Shilan was in a good mood today and didn't show off much. After hastily giving Xiu a gift, she sat directly in the lower left corner of the ladder. Everyone was surprised. The Empress has always been kind, why isn't even Consort Hua arrogant and domineering today? Xiu also felt a bit uncomfortable with the absence of Nian Shilan's provocation, but it was best to have no trouble. Therefore, there was a hint of sincerity in his always hypocritical smile. Draw spring, give tea. There is an old saying in ancient times that people should know how to avoid divination. Xiugang felt the day was stable, but Empress Hua couldn't hold back her tail. As soon as she picked up the tea cup, she curled her lips and smiled with a charming voice, saying, This is Longjing from last year, isn't it? The Empress hasn't finished drinking it yet. Even the best old tea has a musty taste, and I have rewarded Song Ji and the others. After speaking, he pretended to be concerned and said to Xiu, My concubine has the Yuqian Longjing, which is a new tribute for this spring. I will have Songji bring some to the Empress to taste later. Chapter 5. Entering the Palace. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After all, Xiu was not very angry and only stabbed Empress Hua lightly, saying, It's hard for my sister to worry. It's just that my palace has said many times that I don't really like Longjing, but the Emperor still rewarded me a lot. So I asked Empress Qi to bring good things to third brother. Speaking of the child, Consort Hua's face changed a few times, but she still looked up and said, Yes, it's rare for Sister Qi to have such good tea. Next time, what does third brother need? Just talk to our palace. This means that the entire harem, lacking in both east and west, is under the control of Empress Hua. Xiu is open-minded and unwilling to take on these seemingly glamorous yet mysterious burdens. She knew that in the future, when Zhen Huan rose to prominence and encountered frequent incidents, these accounts would have to be attributed to the steward. Therefore, it is also gratifying that Nian Shirlan loves to grab the limelight so much. I have been sick in this palace for these days, and all the affairs in the palace have been handled by Sister Hua. It's really disappointing. Xiu touched the warm and cool jade rui in his hand and smiled, but getting sick is like falling on a mountain, and getting rid of it is like drawing threads. In the coming months, I'm afraid my sister will have to pay more attention. This is natural, Empress Dowager doesn't have to worry, Nian Shirlan replied, but a murmur arose in her heart. When did this old woman release the palace power so happily? It's really strange. Empress Qi had a simple idea, but when she saw Xiu treating Nian Shirlan so kindly, she immediately became uneasy and said, Madam. Empress Qi, there's no need to worry. Xiu suddenly remembered third brother and his childlike daughter, his fake headache turning into a real headache. Third brother is the most filial, and the emperor often praises you for teaching your son well. If you have time, you should often bring him to our palace to talk. Is that right? Empress Qi's expression immediately changed from anxiety to surprise upon hearing these words. Oh, third brother, this child doesn't need anyone to worry about. Recently, he has grown much taller. Tomorrow, I will definitely bring him to show the empress. Well, I haven't seen the third elder brother in my palace for a long time. Xiu did not hide to rub his forehead, and his voice was a bit more weak. Let's stop here today. I have a headache, and I won't have to say hello these days. When all the new sisters in the palace are together, please invite all the sisters to Jingren Palace to talk about it. Yes, congratulations to the empress. Everyone cried poverty to me. The country is poor, the people are poor. Where has all this money gone? Before the emperor could calm his anger, Su Jinliang, the head of the Jingsha room, walked in with a cat on his waist and said, It's late at night. Please ask the emperor to flip over the sign. I didn't call you again, what are you doing in here? Yinzhen clapped his palm, and a needle could be heard falling inside the hall. Su Jinliang knelt down with a thud, kowtowing his head and crying, Your Majesty, you haven't been in the harem for almost half a month. If you don't flip the sign again, the Empress Dowager will take off the servant's head. The emperor remained silent for a long time, only staring at Su Jinliang's head in contemplation. It's okay, don't be swaying your face in front of me. I'll go see Consort Hua later. Ah. I'm leaving now. Su Jinliang stood up immediately as if he had been granted amnesty, and fled in despair. The next day, while Song Ji was kneading the legs of the tired Nian Shirlan, who was waiting for her to sleep, Zhou Ninghai limped and led Huang Guiquan in to greet her. Madam, I bid you my respects, Huang Guiquan said with a courteous bow and a flattering smile. Nian Shirlan was busy enjoying himself and lazily called out to him to get up. Huang Guiquan didn't care at all and flattered, saying, The empress has planned the accommodation for the new palace lords and asked the servant to read it to her. If she thinks there's anything wrong, she can make the necessary changes. Let's talk about it. Hua Fei let out a deep breath and didn't want to face it anymore. This group of newcomers still entered the palace. Huang Gui wiped away the non-existent sweat on his forehead and read it carefully. Wait, Hui Guiren. Xian Guiren. Hua Fei sat up straight, her beautiful eyes full of resentment. Huang Guiquan immediately knelt down and explained, Madam Hui, in this draft, there are 4 people who have won titles. Borjigit nobleman lives alone in Xiusheng Palace, while Fu Cha's refined nobleman lives with Zhen Guiren and Xia Chang in Qingxian Palace. The other 2 are Hui Guiren and Wen Dang from Xianfu Palace. The Borjigit clan is just a mascot from a marriage alliance between Manchuria and Mongolia, which is not to be feared. However, is this Qingqian palace allocated by the emperor? The emperor doesn't care about this, Huang Guiquan continued, shaking his head. It was the Empress Dowager who said that behind Xian Guiren was the Fucha clan with a full army adorned with yellow flags. We must not neglect it. Zhen Guiren and Xia Changzai were both favored by the emperor in the palace selection, which is why they chose the Qingqian palace, which is closer to the emperor. As Hua Fei's eyebrows gradually furrowed, Song Ji immediately began to furrow. Empress, Xian Guiren comes from everyone, and I'm sure she wouldn't be a fox seducing the master. However, Xia Chang heard that he doesn't even pay attention to teaching his mother. With such an arrogant and domineering nature, Zhen Guiren may not be liked by the emperor, but everyone will have to accept it. Besides, what about Qingqian Palace? Only our Ikuan Palace in the palace has the Kuan character from the Cunning Palace where the emperor and empress got married. It can be seen that in the emperor's heart, Empress, you are the most cunning person. Huang Guiquan finally realized and followed suit, saying, that's right. As for Hui Guiren and Wen agree to live with Empress Jing in the same place, I'm afraid they may not be able to see the emperor's holy face in the future. In this way, no one in the palace is as good as Empress. Empress Hua then waved her handkerchief and impatiently said, the Empress is used to pleasing the emperor. With a word of praise from the emperor, she hurriedly presented it. In that case, I also want to see if the Qingqian Palace can handle this blessing. At this point, the residences of the young masters have remained unchanged. The next day before dawn, Shen, Zhen, and others had already bid farewell to their families and set off in sedan chairs towards the Forbidden City. Greetings to all the young masters, good luck. At the side gate of Xiusheng Gate, several eunuchs were already waiting here. As soon as everyone arrived, they saluted in a proper manner. Anlingrong was timid and curious, quietly turning his head to look at Zhen Huan and Shen Meizhuang beside him, only to see them greeting each other very affectionately. Sister Mei. Huaner. Zhen Huan's excitement was unbearable, but she was pulled back by her aunt Fong Roa, who was nearby. Little master, this is not the time to speak. Your father-in-law will take you to your respective palaces, she said, it's getting late, young masters, let's enter the palace earlier. The nearby father-in-law took the opportunity to speak. Hui Guiren and Wen agree, please come this way. A young eunuch led the two into the red brick and green tile palace path. Shen Meizhuang smiled and nodded at Anlingrong, waiting for her to arrive before they left together. I am 17 years old this year and should be older than my younger sister. Let's go to the palace together. If my younger sister doesn't mind, you can call me Mei sister. In the future, we can also take care of each other while living together in Xianfu Palace. These words made Anlingrong, who was originally somewhat nervous, feel like a spring breeze. She brought up a trusting smile and said, my younger sister is indeed on the 16th this year, so she will have to trouble Sister Mei more in the future. You're welcome, sister. Shen Meizhuang really liked this beautiful and gentle-looking sister, so he took the initiative to introduce her. This is my intimate maid, Kaiyue and Xiusheng. Anlingrong patted the little girl who was leaning against her and said, Qingzhu is very skilled and makes delicious food. If sister doesn't mind, Lingrong will ask Qingzhu to bring some to her in a while. Now that we live in the same palace, Lingrong will definitely treat Sister Mei as Lingrong's own sister. Shen Meizhuang covered his mouth and smiled coquettishly, I'm really lucky now. On the other end, Zhen Huan and her group were taken to the entrance of Qingqian Palace. It's so gorgeous, no wonder everyone wants to enter the Forbidden City. Huanbi couldn't help but admire the magnificent palace. Yo! Look who this is. With this poor and impoverished appearance, even looking at a courtyard alone is full of splendor. How petty. Chapter 6. Consort. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Huan bidding shyly and angrily turned to give way to Zhen Huan, saying, this is the newly entered Zhen Guiren. I wonder which young master you are. Xia Dongchun choked for a few breaths, but it was the palace maid next to her who saluted first. She then followed reluctantly and bowed perfunctorily to Zhen Huan, saying, "My concubine is often in the Xia family, and I have seen Lady Zhen. It's not that Xia Dongchun has changed her temperament, but at least she is from a prestigious family and has some kind of refined upbringing, which is why she has to endure her temper and bow. However, no one knows why she looks down on her in her heart. Sister Xia, you're welcome. It was because I taught the palace maids not to be good, which made my sister laugh. Please don't take it amiss. I'm new here today, but I'm afraid I won't be able to handle it. I'll have to act as a host to help my sister someday." Zhen Huan didn't think much, she just felt that although Xia Changzai had a bit of poison in her mouth, she was just a person with no ulterior motives, so she was happy to have a good relationship. However, the speaker is unintentional, while the listener is intentional. Huanbi felt that it was her own young lady who felt ashamed of her. For a moment, she felt a bit uneasy and said, "Although they were all born to the same father, I just became a servant for the young lady. But now, she is always inferior. Just growing up together from a young age and having a deep friendship, so Huanbi only had a thought in her heart and didn't care too much. Just as I regained my senses, I saw Xia Dongchun walking away with a swaying posture. From afar, only a few inaudible complaints could be heard. No matter how good the location of Qingxian Palace is, many people are squeezed in. It's really unlucky." Lu Zhu immediately became indignant and said, "Mississippi. It's okay." Zhen Huan only smiled and gestured for Huan Bai to give some broken silver to the father-in-law who was leading the way. In the palace, unlike at home, there are ears and eyes everywhere. She is willing to talk nonsense. We just need to ignore it. Why take it easy? When everything is tidy up, Cui Jinxi and Kong Luhai are already waiting inside the house. Zhen Huan looked at the furnishings inside the room with a smile on her face and cheerfully called out to the bowers, "Are there anyone else living in Qingxian Palace? Take me to greet you." Little Lord Rong, Cui Jinxi stood up obediently. Qingxian Palace is a newly established palace in this selection, so both inside and outside have been renovated. It is also close to the heart-nourishing Hall of the Holy One and is a top-notch residence. There is no Empress Dowager in the palace now, and besides you, there are also Xiangue Ren and Xia Chong living there. Xiangue Ren has the same position as you, but has a title, so it would be good for me to visit you later. That's good, everyone has similar positions and can get closer, Zhen Huan nodded. Cui Jinxi didn't answer her words and only started a different conversation. "This is Xiao Yunzi. These two are Kong Luhai's disciples, Xiao Yinzi and Xia Hizi. These are Juqing and Peir, both dedicated to serving the young master. From now on, you will be my people." Zhen Huan felt a little nervous when facing so many servants for the first time. "Being a servant in my house, the most important thing is loyalty. Have you remembered it?" After finishing speaking, she nervously glanced at the most stable and gentle Jinxi in the room. Seeing Cui Jinxi nodding in approval, Zhen Huan secretly breathed a sigh of relief and said to Huan Bai, "Then give it a reward. The Empress has been reading all day. Let's eat some fruits and rest our eyes." Seeing Huachun walking in with a plate of oranges, Jianxiu hurriedly advised. Upon hearing this, Xiu glanced at the lacquered night outside the window and put down the medical book in his hand. While waiting for the autumn oranges to be peeled, she suddenly remembered those old friends and casually asked, "Have all the new concubines who have entered the palace settled down today?" "Yes, they have already rested in their respective palaces. It's rare for this palace to be so leisurely, but Empress Hua has to work alone." Xiu took the autumn-cut tribute orange and leisurely put it in his mouth. It's cool and refreshing. Let's enjoy some later and let everyone taste it. The Empress is just too good-tempered. Talking about these servants makes her angry." Huachun, however, stared reluctantly and said, "Madam, look at this honey orange." There were originally top-quality pomelos, but they were picked away by Songji from the Huafei Palace. She even said, "The emperor is going to have dinner at Ikuan Palace in the afternoon, so naturally we need to choose the best one to offer." This has been so many times. Xiu looked at the girl in front of him who was defending himself, feeling a sigh of relief in his heart. If it weren't for her own thoughts and mistakes, how could she let her long-time companion, Aichuan, confess to the death penalty? With this in mind, Xiu couldn't help but put down the honey orange in his hand and sighed lightly. What's so important to let her know about these small matters? You go and call Xiu Xia and Xiao Dong in. I have something to say to you in this palace. Hua Chun looked at Jian Qiu with some confusion, and seeing that the other person was just nodding, she suppressed her inexplicable emotions and went out to call someone. You have all followed this palace from the hidden residence, and there is no doubt about the use of people. Therefore, this palace has some heartfelt words to share with you today. Xiu paused for a moment and raised his eyes to signal Jian Qiu. The latter immediately understood and summoned Jiang Fuhai with the other servants to guard more than 10 steps outside the main hall. Xiu nodded before continuing, "Now that the new concubines have entered the palace, you have also seen them all. They are young and beautiful, like 100 flowers competing for beauty, but this palace is already old and pale." Donghua and Chunhua were about to speak out and refute, but were interrupted by Xiu raising his hand. "I don't think I'm a snake to you all. During these days of recuperation, I suddenly came to an understanding. I am the Empress of the Central Palace, and I have believed that I was not a big mistake for many years. However, my position is actually more stable than I imagined. Therefore, I no longer care about any palace power or favor among the empresses, and I don't want to worry about it. However, my palace is in poor health. I only hope that you four can serve me wholeheartedly to make up for the shortcomings in your health over the years. As long as our palace is still here, we won't be easily bullied by others. Don't worry, Empress, everything has us. Empress is willing to take care of herself now, and the servants are really happy," said Dan Dong's round eyes with only a crack in her smile. Xiuxia never expected that her position in the Empress's heart would be so high. While feeling grateful, she also felt a little anxious. She was busy making promises, but did not notice that there was a hint of doubt and exploration hidden in the eyes of Xiu, who looked over. Xiu looked around and said calmly, "You are all confidants of this palace. You should be rewarded for your achievements, and even if you have made mistakes, you should be punished. Your words and actions represent the meaning of this palace. In the future, you should also pay attention to your words and actions. Don't let anyone catch your little braids, otherwise this palace will not spare you." "Yes, the maids understand," everyone responded in unison. Seeing the diverse expressions of everyone present, Xiu then picked up the teacup and said, "Cut Qiu and leave, let the rest of you go down." Chapter 7. Eyeliner. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Empress, do you have any other orders? Jian Qiu was most able to sense the implied meaning of Xiu's words, and did not forget to pinch Xiu's shoulder in her hand. Xiu took Jian Qiu's hand and said with a soft gaze, "In this deep palace, the only one I can confide in is you." Jian Qiu's eyes were immediately filled with tears, and she pretended to kneel down. However, Xiu raised her hand to interrupt her movements. "Do you know who else is the master of Xiuxiao?" The candlelight in the hall flickered, reflecting Xiu's gloomy expression. "You are thoughtful and have carefully monitored her in the past few days. If my palace guesses correctly, she will definitely bring this to the master behind you today. Damn it, I didn't know Jingren Palace had raised such an ambitious person." Jian Qiu spoke in a resentful tone and quickly knelt down to express his opinion. "Madam, don't worry, I will definitely catch her little braid. Pikun is popular and sociable. I heard that there are some of her little sisters in every palace." Xiu patted her hands and continued, "Although I don't want to meddle in my own affairs, as the leader of the imperial palace, I cannot help but know some things. Let Pick Hun and Pick Hun do these things. Each of them is as careful as a hare and does things quickly and neatly, so I'll give them to you to give us more eyes in Jingren Palace. Jian Qiu nodded heavily and said, drawing spring and drawing winter has a simple mind, and I feel sincere when I look at them. Just rest assured, madam. Do you know? I used to think that if I were more magnanimous and virtuous, and more diligent and obedient, even if it meant I would no longer be suitable for cultivation in the Ulanara clan, what would happen? The emperor might care more about me in his heart. But in the autumn, I had a dream, a nightmare that seemed to be irreparable. Yi Xiu shook his loyal servant's hand slightly and his eyes turned red. In my dream, no matter how I cry, the emperor's heart will always be with others. I cannot compare to my sister, nor can I compare to the new concubines who have entered the palace. Later on, I became hysterical and did all kinds of evil. In fact, what kind of empress position? What kind of palace power do I hold? All I want from beginning to end is for my child to grow up safely, and for my husband to respect and protect me. What's wrong with me? Jianqiu's eyes turned red, but she silently clenched Yi Xiu's cold hand. Yi Xiu took a few deep breaths before calming down a bit. Now that I open my eyes again, I have already thought about it. The most ruthless imperial family, wanting a true heart is the most wrong. Rosé's dreamlike days before entering the mansion now seem more like a satirical knife. He is the emperor. However, by cutting autumn, this palace has already awakened. Since our palace has already been elevated to the rank of empress of the Qing dynasty, we only seek a peaceful and esteemed remaining life. Would you be willing to accompany me without hesitation? Jian Qiu knocked her head and said in a firm voice, I will never refuse to die. Okay, Yi Xiu lowered her eyes, her slender eyelashes covering her moved expression. You should take the opportunity to go to the Thai hospital and choose a reliable newcomer to observe in secret. Although our palace is familiar with some pharmacology, it is only a superficial field of gynecology. The next day when our palace's body is adjusted, will we be able to give birth to a legitimate son in peace? Let's see if there are our own people in the Thai hospital. Do you understand the benefits of this? Jian Qiu's eyes suddenly lit up and he kowtowed again, I'll save you. Upon seeing the situation, Yi Xiu understood that Jian Qiu had already heard the implied meaning. What he was plotting was not a stable rear position, but an imperial throne with thousands of people above and no one at its peak. Xiusheng Palace. Does she really say that? The Empress Dowager closed her eyes and coiled the Buddhist beads, hastily listening to the palace maid kneeling down and looking over in disbelief. It was Xiusheng who appeared in the Xiusheng Palace. She trembled and kowtowed her head, explaining, the Empress Dowager has a calm expression and has not been greedy for palace power in recent days. Almost all affairs have been delegated to Empress Hua. I think she really wants to take good care of herself first. Silence. It wasn't until the cold sweat from Xiusheng's forehead dripped onto the blanket of the Xiusheng Palace that she heard the Empress Dowager's calm and confident voice above her head. Then let her go. If the Empress can really take good care of herself and give birth to an elder brother, she can be considered as the successor of my Ulanara family. Yes. Xiusheng dared not delay for a moment and left the seemingly peaceful Xiusheng Palace, unaware that her every move had long been noticed by Jianqiu. A few days later, as soon as the new lords settled down, the flowing rewards in the palace were distributed in batches. The Qingqian Palace was filled with joy, and from afar one could hear Xia Dongchun shouting loudly, no matter how good the reward from Empress Hua is, it's not as good as that from Empress Dowager. As Jianqiu was about to step out of Qingqian Palace, he paused and muttered impatiently, the Empress had just spoken and acted with caution, but then came out with such an ancestor to bring bad luck to her. It's really. On the other end, Zhen Huan didn't see Jianqiu. Instead, she saw Zhou Ning, who was coming to give her a reward, with a calm complexion. Therefore, she had to say 2 good words to Empress Hua. Empress Hua has spent so much money, and I am truly grateful. I have never even seen these many good things. Zhen Guiren doesn't need to be polite, these are all things that Empress Hua is used to in the palace. Zhou Ninghai forced his temper to respond and left Qingqian Palace without looking back. Before leaving, he wished he could collect all the rewards sent to Xia Dongchun's place to relieve his anger. It was not until then that Xia Dongchun saw the back of Zhou Ninghai's low-pressure system, and her heart suddenly became uneasy. She ignored the palace maids beside her and shouted, "It's over. Why didn't you stop me just now? If this were Pucci." Huanbi couldn't help but laugh and made Xia Dongchun turn around and glare angrily. Zhen Guiren is so cultured that he dares to ridicule his master in front of his subordinates. Zhen Huan sighed inwardly and led the panicked Huanbi to Xia Dongchun, gently blessing her body. "Hello Xia, I have grown up with you since I was young and have been spoiled by me. It was my sister's fault that I angered her for a while. I hope you can spare her this time. Xia Dongchun has been pampered and grown up since childhood. He has never suffered such a grievance." He relentlessly shouted, "Who is so intimate with your sister and sister? You are a noble man, and I am always here. I cannot argue with you. But you are a real slave. If you don't give me an explanation today, don't blame me for going to the Empress to see if there is room in the palace for another slave who bullies the master." Xia Dongchun was holding her breath and had nowhere to vent, staring fiercely at Huanbi who had bumped into her, his words becoming more and more serious. "What's wrong with this? It's all blue and white, why are you making such a fuss? The Qingqian Palace is so close to the Emperor's heart-nourishing hall, and I'm not afraid of spreading the news to anger the Emperor." A sound of pearl hairpins colliding came from far to near, and everyone then saw the elegant and noble person. The Fucha family. Whether it is from a big family background or not, as soon as Xian Guiren appeared, his aura first overwhelmed the newcomers in the entire palace. Having met a noble person, the noble person is blessed with peace and prosperity. Xian Guiren didn't shout, but instead looked at Zhen Huan, the only 2 nobles present, and said, "Zhen Guiren, although I only have one more title than you, I am also personally conferred by the Emperor, and behind me is the Fucha clan. Do you have the right to be the head of the entire Qingqian Palace?" Chapter 8. Consort Hua. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This is natural, Zhen Huan's face remained unchanged. My concubine was planning to pack up and go to greet my sister, but she didn't want her sister to see a joke. It's my fault. Xian Guiren nodded in satisfaction, and her tightly clenched hands under her handkerchief relaxed a bit. Her tone softened a bit. Both sisters, get up. Don't blame your sister for her bad tone just now. It's just that the rules that should be followed in the royal palace and the vicinity of the emperor are not to be violated. What happened to make the 2 sisters unhappy? Xia Dongchun also forgot his previous words, "I don't like the way my sister and sister are called," and told his grievances one by one. "Miss Zhen, is what Miss Xia said true?" The Fucha clan's head grew a bit big. The family sent her to the palace to flatter her, not to end such an embarrassing lawsuit. Zhen Huan also felt a bit embarrassed. Although Xia Dongchun added some embellishments, the fact was that Huanbi was disrespectful first. She had to grit her head and salute again, saying, "It's because my concubine has been unruly in disciplining me, which has angered Xian Guiren and Xia Chang. My concubine is willing to accept all punishment." Huanbi also knelt on the ground with regret and confessed, "It was my fault. I am willing to be punished, and I hope the 2 young masters will not blame my young master again." Xian Guiren just wanted to go back and rest quickly, so he gave an order in Xia Chang's eagerly anticipating eyes. "You are all newcomers who have just entered the palace a few days ago. If you don't discipline yourself well, you should know the consequences. However, as a first offense, you will be punished 10 times with a cane as a warning. I will then go and report to the Empress and Empress Hua. Sister Xian is wise. If not, I'll let my concubine supervise me, right? Xia Dongchun had already forgotten about offending Consort Hua and only smiled and complimented the Fucha family. As you please. Xian Ren quickly returned to his room and immediately closed the door. Huanbi, who was being stared at by Xia Dongchun, felt that her blood from head to toe had been frozen. I may have made a mistake, but being watched and executed by the people in the palace may make me feel like a person. Is this the difference between a servant and a master? Is the life of a servant so worthless that even his own young master takes it for granted? On the other end, although Lingrong also received many rewards from the Empress, watching the constant flow of people from Changshi Hall in Shenmei village, he couldn't help feeling disappointed. Although I have been taken care of by the Empress, my background is so humble that few people in the harem really remember me. Qing Zhu was busy making pastries for Lingrong, but Bao Ke was young and only Bao Wan was serving him at the moment. Due to the change in Yi Xiu's attitude, Aichuan only became familiar with Bao Wan this time and did not give any additional instructions. Therefore, Bao Wan sincerely comforted Lingrong and said, I don't need to be sad. I promise more than usual, but I have the title bestowed by the Emperor. Besides, I promise. Among the concubines who entered the palace this time, the Xiangui and Huigui of the Fucha family have titles, which is enough to prove that my future is limitless. Upon careful consideration, Lingrong realized that the Fucha clan, needless to say, was led by the father of Huiguiren, who was also a co-leader of Jeju. However, his own family could still be granted titles. Could it be that the emperor at this point, Lingrong suddenly felt a little proud and remembered the earrings and silver notes gifted to him by the empress, which made him calm down. So he immediately stood up and said, Go and see how the Qingzhou pastry is doing. Come with me later to thank the empress. Lingrong came to Jingren Palace with Suiyu bean cake and single cage golden milk cake to bid farewell, but unfortunately, Consort Hua was also inside. Empress, may I know if this arrangement, my concubine, is appropriate? Nian Shirlan casually picked up the tea cup and instinctively frowned as she remembered that the tea in Jingren Palace had been replaced by the mellow and slightly sweet Jin Junmei. She took a big sip without any hesitation. In fact, Yi Xiu doesn't really like bitterness. He just used to hold the airs of an empress and use whatever was precious to stand out from others. Now that I no longer have that kind of mindset, I am happy to satisfy my appetite, which is actually in line with the interests of Consort Hua. Therefore, when Consort Hua comes to Jingren Palace, she is rarely as aggressive as before. Of course, the main reason why Empress Hua no longer choked was because she felt that the Empress, who did not compete with her for palace power and was not very favored, was both pleasing and pitiful. She was not like herself, having a family, beauty, power, and imperial favor. Madam, when agreed to come and said he wanted to thank you, Jian Qiu whispered in Yi Xiu's ear. Yi Xiu was too lazy to deal with Consort Hua. Upon hearing this, his eyes lit up and he sat up straight, nodding, let her in. Then he turned his head and comforted Nian Shirlan, letting him continue to charge for the peace and beauty of the harem. Sister Hua, who is so dedicated, naturally deserves everything in this palace. Everything will be left to her to decide. As soon as the words fell, Lingrong respectfully bowed with a food box in hand. My concubine promised and sure to pay her respects to Empress Dowager and Empress Hua. Let's agree, 1. Yi Xiu gestured to describe the winter gift seat and didn't forget to introduce the new person to Consort Hua. Consort Hua's sister probably hasn't seen Wen Agree yet. After all, tomorrow is the day for the palace meeting. Why did Wen Agree suddenly come, but she's not used to living there? Lingrong dared to come and pay respects to the Empress, which had already gathered all his courage. However, he never expected to see the rumored arrogant and domineering Empress Hua here. He became timid for a moment and quickly stood up to salute. If you go back to Empress Dowager, my concubine is living very well. Thank you very much for taking the trouble to arrange it. Before Xiusheng could furrow her brows, Xiu kindly took the conversation and said, "One promised not to be too polite. It's just that my palace is not feeling well now, and most of the affairs in the palace are arranged by Consort Hua. Please don't thank the wrong person, sister." Upon hearing these words, Lingrong wished he could kneel down for Empress Hua and immediately said, "How fortunate I am to have been burdened by Empress Hua's labor, my concubine. No wonder I feel so intimate as soon as I live in. It was Empress Hua who took care of me." Xiusheng was raised by Gao Gao, but instead lost her anger. She lightly tapped the direction of the food box that Lingrong was carrying with her jade hand and spoke arrogantly, "This is all within the jurisdiction of our palace. But what's on your head? Take it out and ask the Empress to take a look at it with our palace. Don't be too petty. Hua Fei is the easiest to coax. A plate of pastries can calm her down." Xiu couldn't help but tease Xiusheng a few times when he saw his expression for the first time, and only then did he feel it was inappropriate. For a moment, there was no one speaking in the entire palace, with different expressions on their faces. However, they were all wondering when the relationship between the Empress and Consort Hua would be so good. Fortunately, Lingrong knew how to look and feel when he was young, and immediately got up and took out the jade bean cake and golden milk cake. There are new dim sum made by the palace maids who are the best at making cakes in the concubine palace. Please also invite the Empress and the Empress Hua to taste them. Xiu was awkwardly embarrassed, so he instructed Xiusheng to directly divide the two copies and bring them up. Xiusheng was not polite either. She had always been disrespectful to the palace, and without waiting for Xiu's movements, she picked up a small piece of golden milk cake and put it in her mouth. This craftsmanship is rare. Xiusheng's eyes widened, like a satisfied cat. Until Xiu praised her a few words, Xiusheng realized that she was still in Jingren Palace and felt uncomfortable all over. She said coquettishly, "Empress, I will leave first." After speaking, he stood up and walked straight to the door. Xiu nodded as usual, too lazy to say anything about seeing off guests. Just as Xiusheng approached Lingrong, he confessed, "One promised to come to Ikuan Palace more often when he has time. Your palace maid's craftsmanship is very good." After speaking, without waiting for Lingrong to respond, she left on her own, with a condescending style of being a favored concubine. Xiu took another sip of tea, and then remembered Lingrong's timid nature. He kindly comforted him, "It's okay, Consort Hua just likes the food made by your palace maid. It's better to go more. Although Consort Hua is a bit arrogant, she doesn't have any bad intentions." Chapter 9. Palace Attendants. You are listening at novelfull.audio. My concubine would like to thank the Empress for her great kindness and willingness to help her overcome any difficulties. I am willing to do so without hesitation. Lingrong kowtowed to Xiu with tears in her eyes. Since childhood, she has not been well received at home, but she did not want to enter the palace and meet such a compassionate Empress. Xiu said that even though he was tired, he also received the worship from Lingrong before calling out. In the future, there will be a time when one agrees to repay our palace. However, for now, you must first establish a foothold and climb up in the harem, otherwise you will not be able to help our palace. My concubine understands. Seeing the cowardice in Lingrong's eyes replaced by fighting spirit, Xiu was satisfied and allowed Lingrong to step down. Until the sun was about to set, Zhen Huan finally had the opportunity to invite Lingrong to go find Zhen Huan together. As soon as they entered the Qingqian Palace, both of them couldn't help but see a bright light in their eyes. They exchanged a glance at each other and smiled without any jealousy, only feeling proud. Huaner is really a good place, Zhen Huan walked in with a familiar tone. Upon hearing this sound, Zhen Huan immediately welcomed her with a smile on her face and said, "Sister Mei." Turning his head, he saw a strange face coming in with Zhen Huan, with a smile that didn't diminish, but the joy in his tone faded a bit. This sister is so familiar with you, don't you know? Lingrong immediately blessed her body and said, my concubine when promised and sure that she has met Lady Zhen. There's no need for such politeness. Shen Meizhuang first smiled at Lingrong, then turned around and pulled Zhen Huan closer. This one promised to enter the palace with you and me on the same day, and coincidentally, he lived with me in Xianfu Palace. That's why he brought her over to meet you. Overall, Lingrong is the youngest among us, and we have to call you Zhen sister. Zhen Huan's smile became a bit real, and she took Lingrong's hand and said warmly, since you are both Mei's sister and my sister. And sister, how good am I to call you that? Having two sisters is an honor for Lingrong, and Lingrong smiled somewhat shyly. Shen Meizhuang was delighted to see this and joked, I don't know if Mr. Zhen has time to entertain the two of us here. Zhen Huan coquettishly bumped Shen Meizhuang's arm and affectionately said, Hui Guiren is used to joking. I must have the ability to entertain Hui Guiren well no matter what. Sisterin, please take your seat quickly. After drinking some children's tea in the inner hall, Shen Meizhuang said seriously, now that Lingrong and I live in Xianfu Palace, the Empress Dowager Jing is a very talkative person. Huaner, how are you doing here? On my end. That's it, Zhen Huan paused. Xian Guiren is not a troublemaker. As for Xiusheng, even if I am a noble person and one level higher than her, I won't offend you. Shen Meizhuang looked at Zhen Huan with some concern, and then examined the elegant decoration of the inner hall before finally calming down a bit. Fortunately, you are a noble person, and there are many people taking care of your affairs. Otherwise, I really wouldn't be at ease. That's right, I just pitied Huanbi. Huanbi. But that close handmaid of yours. Shen Meizhuang couldn't help but put down the teacup and became nervous. What's wrong with her? She was brought into the palace by you, and someone dared to bully her. Isn't this bullying you? It was Huanbi who was young and immature that angered Xiusheng. Zhen Huan patted her chest with some fear and looked at Lingrong. If it weren't for this, I wouldn't have expected the rules in the palace to be so strict. Sister and also needs to be careful. Thank you for considering me, Sister Zhen. Lingrong has taken note of it. But with me and you, Sister Zhen, there's no need to worry. Everyone laughed. On the day of the palace meeting, it is advisable to dress in a dignified manner. On the one hand, it is to give face to the new concubine who has entered the palace, and on the other hand, it is to warn everyone in the harem that even if they temporarily ignore palace affairs, they should not offend the lord of the harem. Although Consort Hua, who was leading the way, was still dressed in delicate and bright attire, she did not show face to the empress on such an important occasion. Therefore, the other concubines were surprised that their relationship had eased and they could not help but become more respectful towards the empress. Are your sisters still used to living in the palace? Thanks to the queen's care, everything is fine, the concubines said in unison. After bowing to the empress, she will continue to pay her respects to Consort Hua. Nian Shirlan didn't shout, but casually took a sip of the tea and furrowed her pretty eyebrows, saying, why doesn't Empress Jean have Jean Jun's eyebrows? This tea is also a bit bitter. Who is this Huafei showing such a grand presence to? Xia Dongchun murmured softly, trying to get close to Xian Guiren to seek approval, which scared him back and forth. Nian Shirlan glanced disdainfully at Xia Dongchun and raised her hand to touch her earrings. The jade sent by the Ministry of Internal Affairs this year is a bit floating, not transparent at all. Good jade is becoming increasingly rare, she said. Yi Xiu knew that Nian Shirlan wanted to intimidate the newcomer, but she was too lazy to poke through it. She only wanted to make everyone disperse quickly, so as not to let the smell of various cosmetics in the room make her headache. My younger sister is young and beautiful, so the jade presented by the Ministry of Internal Affairs is naturally younger and more tender. Recently, our palace has just made some new jewelry, and I will let my younger sister choose some that she likes later. Now, why not let everyone get up first? Nian Shirlan pursed her lips in silence, and the empress spoke. No matter how arrogant she was, she couldn't continue to hold on to those newcomers and had to shout out, only. Is there a Xiusheng who is said to be very capable? Xia Dongchun didn't know why and thought she had won the favor of Empress Hua, completely forgetting how she stepped on it a few days ago. Empress Hua is blessed with peace and prosperity, and her concubines are often in the Xia family. Xia Chengzai really knows how to dress up, isn't this material very expensive? Nian Shirlan covered the corners of her mouth with a handkerchief and couldn't help but mock. This is the material gifted by the Empress Dowager. Xia Dongchun looked earnestly at Yi Xiu. Today, when I meet you, my concubines have specially put it on. Nian Shirlan suddenly felt a little irritable, feeling that these days had been a waste of time for Yi Xiu. As expected, she was still as annoying as before, and her voice suddenly cooled down. I know you have a heart for it, I really have a heart for it, she said. Yi Xiu was about to support his forehead, thinking that the harem turmoil should not start from him. So he patiently said, this material has been sent to every new sister who has just entered the palace. I hope you can win the favor of the emperor as soon as possible, so that you can continue to have offspring for the Qing dynasty. Nian Shirlan understood Yi Xiu's words about carrying water, but felt that the words that seemed to soothe him came inexplicably. She looked at everyone and said, the empress is magnanimous. Who are the Xian Guiren, Hui Guiren, and Zhen Guiren? My concubine, please see Empress Hua. Empress Hua is blessed with peace and prosperity. The three of them saluted Empress Hua. Xian Guiren is dignified and generous, Hui Guiren is elegant and calm, and Zhen Guiren cannot conceal her beauty. No wonder the emperor likes it. Yi Xiu suddenly became aggressive when Shirlan entered the palace as a newcomer, so she didn't bother to talk to her anymore. Instead, she hesitated whether to find an opportunity to reveal the secret of Huan Yixiang or find a way to save the life of Empress Hua. Although Yi Xiu claims not to be a good person, she is also troubled by love and has some pity for Nian Shirlan. The honey at this time, the arsenic at that time. Just look at the coquettish and wild nature of concubine Hua. When in love, Yin Zhen was eager to dote on the young orchids and called them enthusiastic and cheerful. When not in love, it is said that their personality is rebellious and unworthy of virtue. This is the desire of love for life, and the desire of evil for death. Before Yi Xiu could come up with a solution, he heard that Nian Shirlan and Zhen Huan were going to fight again. Oh. Xian Guiren, you are at least from the Fucha tribe, extremely noble, and have a title. How could you let Zhen Guiren stand in front of you now? You are also very kind. Chapter 10. Summer, Winter, and Spring. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shen Meizhuang, Zhen Huan, and Fucha Peiyun all changed their faces in the audience. Especially Zhen Huan looked awkwardly at Xian Guiren several times, and the latter looked calm. She had to kneel down and admit her mistake. I didn't understand the rules when I first entered the palace. I did not intend to offend Sister Xian, but I just wanted to stand with Hui Guiren and feel at ease with each other. I understand my guilt and will never repeat it. Shen Meizhuang also wanted to open his mouth to plead for Zhen Huan, but was interrupted by Yi Xiu's opening. All right, if Shen Guiren doesn't understand the rules and offends Xian Guiren, he will punish you for copying the palace rules 10 times. Since Xian Guiren has been wronged, our palace will choose more exquisite things for you to enjoy. If you have any problems in the future, you can come and tell our palace. Yi Xiu paused for a moment, and Feng's eyes scanned the crowd below. Seeing no one opposing, he continued. From now on, all sisters will be in the palace. Firstly, we must serve the emperor wholeheartedly and do our best to spread branches and leaves for the royal family. Secondly, we must work together with one heart and one mind, live in harmony, and not lose our dignity by being jealous. Today, all of you are tired, so kneel down and rest. Yes, my concubine, is leaving. Huafei, please stay for a while. Xiu still called out to Xiusheng, has my sister been doing well in handling official affairs lately? The meaning of Empress's words is to reclaim the power of managing the 6 palaces from my concubine. Upon hearing these words, Xiusheng immediately stood up like a cockfighting rooster, but after all, he suppressed the fire and did not make any absurd moves. He only spoke sternly. My concubine asked herself, there is no fault. Did the Empress prepare to let go of the trials and kill the donkey as soon as she saw the new couple settle down in the palace? Unlike Xiusheng's fierce and tense demeanor, Xiu only felt amused in his heart. It was probably because of his good temper that Xiusheng's arrogant attitude was made. If he didn't dampen her spirit, how could he use it for himself in the future? At this point, Xiu only enjoyed the tea with ease, without giving Xiusheng a glance. Everyone in Jingren Palace, upon seeing the situation, remained silent with their eyes, noses, mouths, and hearts, and dared not breathe. After all, Xiusheng was young and inexperienced. After a moment, she reluctantly bent her knees and said, Empress, please forgive me. I was anxious for a moment, so I spoke without hesitation. I hope Empress will not blame me. All right, I understand my sister's thoughts in this palace. Sit down quickly. It's okay this time, but in the future, I can't be so reckless in front of the Emperor. Upon hearing this, Xiusheng rolled her sleeves and sat down, but her aura remained undiminished. So, what did the Empress mean by what she just said? I'm just afraid that my younger sister will feel tired, so I want to suggest that she pick some people to come out and fight with her. After years of hard work and illness, my palace is now busy recuperating, and I'm really lacking in clone skills. I'm also worried that my younger sister will follow in the footsteps of my palace. Xiusheng raised her eyebrows and took a skeptical sip of Jin Junmei, who was newly introduced to the painting of spring, before answering the question, does Empress really think so? Xiu is too lazy to talk. Upon seeing this, Xiusheng finally put away her thorns all over her body and said, since it's not about dividing power but just helping me fight, who does the Empress think is more suitable? Jingpin is good, with a calm temperament. Chao Guiren, why not? This time it was Xiu's turn to frown, almost forgetting about Chao Guiren. In the city of Shirlan, many things would have been unimaginable without Chao Qinma's advice behind the scenes. It seems that Chao Qinma is the biggest obstacle to keeping Empress Hua alive. Even though all her plans were just to give her child another way to survive, her mind was too cunning. Compared to my previous life, I am not inferior to myself, so this is not a good outcome. Xiu smiled bitterly in his heart. After all, Chao Guiren has a lively mind. I'm afraid it might be better to let his younger sister take control of her. Xiusheng turned her eyes and stood up gracefully. Yes, in a few days, I'll find Jingpin to help me with chores. I'll leave first, she said before the words fell, the person had disappeared outside the door. Outside the Jingren Palace, Xia Dongchun caught up with Zhen Huan, and Lingrong with a smile all the way, and loudly mocked herself, saying, the two sisters are really not a disgrace to the family's demeanor. They are like setting up a stage, but they can't even distinguish between superiority and inferiority. They are really admirable to my younger sister. Everyone looked at each other from the front, and Lingrong had already saluted in a proper manner. Greet Xia Chengzai. Xia Dongchun saw Lingrong for the first time, but he was too lazy to deal with such a timid person. He only stared at Shenmeizhuang and Zhen Huan's ridicule and said, can the two sisters allow the servants to receive so many rewards in this palace? Heaven's grace, all sisters should share it. Big Fong Lei of Shenmeizhuang answered the question, I'm going back to the palace to pick some good ones and then send them to your sister's palace. Since Sister Xia is here, why not pick some first? My Xia family is not lacking in these entertainment items, Xia Dongchun rolled her eyes over. It's just that the benefactor used to be so good at buying people's hearts, but it's my younger sister who has taken my eye off it. Zhen Huan couldn't help but rush forward to argue, but was stopped by Shen Meizhuang. Lingrong was just about to say something, but was interrupted by Duan Dong, Ic Huigairen, Zhengwen, Xiusheng Zai, and Wenyi. The young masters are auspicious. Xia Dongchun immediately put on a flattering smile and said, "Oh, isn't this a depiction of Aunt Dong? But does the Empress have anything to tell her concubines about?" Describing winter as a blessing for the body, his tone became a bit cold. "Auntie doesn't dare to be, it's just that Empress Dowager likes tranquility. Therefore, there should be no noise outside Jingren Palace, and the young masters should not make taboos." Xia Dongchun's face changed several times, but in the end, she still stiffened and smiled. "This is nature, this is nature. Please don't bother the Empress with such a small matter, Auntie. My concubines will bid farewell now." Upon seeing this, Shen Meizhuang nodded to Shan Dong with gratitude and shyness. "Thank you very much to Shan Dong's aunt, and also to the Empress for her help. My concubines have offended me a lot, and I hope the Empress can forgive me. I respectfully bid farewell to a few young masters," said Dan Dong with a detached yet proper smile. It wasn't until Dan Dong made these things a joke and told Yi Xiu, that Yi Xiu realized that he had saved Xia Dongchuan's life by chance. "I don't know how many waves this Xia Chang can churn out," Yi Xiu sneered in his heart. And this time, Fuzi has already returned to Jingren Palace, and Zhen Huan has been quite angry with Xia Dongchun. I guess she won't avoid favor this time, right? However, Zhen Huan, who is no longer special, will still be remembered by the emperor like that. Thinking of this, Yi Xiu couldn't help but liven up his mind and said, since he doesn't avoid being spoiled, the scenes of apricot blossom rain and relying on plum blossom garden can also be played by someone else. In Qingqian Palace. On that day outside the palace, did you still take your promise seriously? Zhen Huan's eyes turned red as when Shichu felt her pulse. Seeing that there were only Lu Zhu and Huanbi in the room, she couldn't help but ask. When Shichu looked at his beloved in such a way that he had already disregarded all worldly affairs and wished to dig out his entire heart to show the person in front of him. Seriously, I will always prioritize you in everything. The word forever is simple to say. Zhen Huan closed her eyes and stopped looking straight. Wei Chen knew he had no other strengths. When Shichu knelt devoutly at the feet of Zhen Huan, his tone becoming more firm. The only thing worth mentioning is the heavy promise. I will never forget the life-saving kindness of meeting Zhen when I was young. Seeing that Zhen Huan's expression seemed somewhat relaxed, when Shichu immediately took a few steps forward on her knees and said solemnly, just give me your orders. I only wish that Lord Wen could be by Huan'er's side when I need it. Zhen Huan lowered her eyes, looking very weak. My lord, I will never refuse to die.